Hello everyone. If you're interested in learning how to make knives and you want to set up your shop and you don't know what tools to get, I'm going to be sharing with you the 6 most important tools that I would get if I was starting completely over. If you're interested in learning more about making knives, then you should definitely consider subscribing, because on this channel, I teach beginner knife makers more about the crafts and how to increase their skills and how to actually grow that craft and that skill into a small business. So as you're starting to build your shop, these 6 tools are going to be the foundation of what you can build the rest of your shop off of. At least that's what I did. Even as time has gone on, which I've made hundreds of knives and I've been doing this for a long time, my process hasn't really changed enough to change tools from these. There's some different stuff that I've, bought, or different tools that I've acquired to change the process somewhat, but even to this day, I don't have that many tools that are outside of this list. I have upgraded versions of them, but most of them are not completely new. And one more thing I wanted to go over before I actually get into the list is a lot of people have opinions about what different models or sizes you should get when it comes to things like different forges, belt sanders, angle grinders, and they'll say, no, you absolutely need to get this or you need to get this. And here's my advice to you. Just remember, it's your shop. You're going to be the one paying the bill for it, and you're going to be the one using it. I recommend starting with really the best ones that you can afford, but don't go crazy with it. I mean, I started out with a 1x30 belt sander, and it was one of the best tools that I ever got, and it's still one of my favorite tools to this day. I use a 2x72 now, but I still have a spot in my heart for a 1x30 because of how useful it was when I was starting out. So don't get too caught up in that, and just be careful about listening to everyone's opinions, because everyone's talking from their own experience, which can be extremely skewed. So just keep that in mind as you go forward. So with that, let's actually get into the list. And the first thing on that list is a belt sander. Again, there's a lot of opinions about what's the best and what's not, but if you're starting out and you need to get quite a few tools at once, you may not have the budget to really stretch over a bunch of different tools. So I have no reason to say that you should not get a 1x30 inch belt sander. If you can afford a bigger one or a more powerful one or a better one, then absolutely get a bigger one. But if all you can afford is a 1x30 belt sander, that's what got me up off the ground and actually got me moving, was a 1x30 inch belt sander. The belts do wear out fairly quickly, and it's not overly powerful, but if you're patient and you work with it, it does get the job done, especially if you're making them on a smaller scale. But I've made, I don't even know how many knives. I made 150 knives with a 1x30 before I moved on to a 2x72. So think about the money you can really make with that if you choose to sell them. The next tool on this list is an angle grinder. Now, some people say that this is kind of the Swiss Army knife of the knife making shop because there's so many different attachments for them, and that's kind of true, but there's a few drawbacks. They're not very precise, especially if you're doing any sort of grinding with them. For cutting, they're great. That's what I primarily use them for, is for cutting. You will need a vise as well, a bench vise to hold the workpiece. Whereas a belt sander, you don't. So a belt sander is more precise. These two tools work very well together. So I definitely recommend getting both. I upgraded to a DeWalt 7 to 9 inch grinder later on. But for a long time, I used angle grinder that was under $50. I even still do that. Mostly I use it for cutting, like I said, but you don't have to get an extremely powerful one or extremely high-end expensive one to start out. But for an angle grinder, I would say any size is good as long as it's a 4.5 inch or bigger. I know they make some that are smaller. Don't go smaller than 4.5 inches. The next thing on this list is a drill or a drill press. There isn't really a lot of difference between the different models, different brands, different prices. And for a long time, at least for the handle scales, I used a hand crank drill. I've made hundreds of knives with a hand crank drill to drill out the pinholes for the scales. Even a cheap one will perform very well. A drill press is better, But if you can't afford a drill press, I would say in the context of making full tang knives, there's not really much of an advantage of having a drill press over a drill. Now, if you're making stuff like guards and stuff like that, a drill press is definitely going to be better because it's more precise and it's easier to keep things square and all that. So if you're getting into the more custom stuff, definitely consider looking into a drill press. But if you're just starting out and you want to make full tang knives, a handheld drill will do just fine. The next tool that I'd really recommend getting is a forge. So a forge is going to be useful for heat treatment, and that's kind of the last thing on this list that you actually really need to do stock removal. So if you just get steel blanks and you're not actually forging out knives, you only need a belt sander, an angle grinder, a drill, and a forge. The forge, it really is just for heat treatment, anything to actually heat up the knives. A forge is it's the cheapest way forward. They're very affordable. Forges are more affordable now than they've ever been. So you can get them for, I think, as low as $75 in different places, certainly $100 or less. And even if you just get a one burner forge for heat treatment, that'll do a lot for you. I've even made, I don't recommend this, but I have made swords with a single burner forge. I eventually did upgrade to a 2-burner, but if you get a forge that has one single burner, just a propane forge, keep them very affordable. And I would recommend propane if you're getting one from scratch rather than something like coal, because it's a lot easier to control and the heat is a lot more even throughout the forge. It's just way less temperamental. So if you're a beginner, that's the route that I would go. So that brings me to this question. What do you do or plan to do when you make knives? Would you rather forge knives out or do you stick with stock removal? I would love to hear your answer to that in the comments. That'll help inform me on what type of content I should make in the future. That'll help improve the quality and be more useful to those who are viewing it. All right, the last 2 tools on this list are, one of them is only necessary if you're forging and the other one's just kind of a bonus. So the next one is an anvil. Now, this does not have to be a traditionally shaped anvil. I mean, it could be traditional, like a German style, like a 2-horn or like a London pattern or something like that. You can get those, but they're kind of pricey. So if you're looking to get an anvil, you can get a cheaper one. I know that it's the Doyle anvil, I think, from Harbor Freight. I could be mispronouncing it, I don't know. But those I've heard very good things about. If you're looking for a cheaper one, or if you just get something that's a solid block of steel, it doesn't have to be an anvil. It can be what people call an anvil-shaped object. You can also use railroad tracks, things like that, if you can find them. And you can find them sometimes on Facebook Marketplace or something like that. You can turn them into an anvil, and sometimes you can actually find railroad track anvils on Marketplace. I think the most utilitarian, cost-effective way forward would be a Doyle anvil. It just depends on what your budget is. Those are around $170 maybe. And then the last tool on this list is one of my favorites, but it's not commonly talked about. A lot of knife makers don't use them at all, and that is a bench grinder. I used a bench grinder before I used a belt sander because that's just all I had. But a bench grinder is one of the handiest tools that I have found because of the different attachments you can put on them while having a stationary tool. So you can put things on them like stone wheels and they last for a really long time, as opposed to some others that wear out faster. Also, buffing wheels, there's nothing that's as good as a bench grinder for buffing. And you can even get sanding wheels to put on them that are similar to an angle grinder sanding wheel, but they're held in place. So it's easier to get a better finish if you're doing any sort of finishing with them on either knife blades or knife handles. So once you get these tools, if you start making knives with them, you'll notice that they're really good, but there is some upgrades you may want to make and some changes that you may want to make. I've got a bigger version of pretty much all the tools. Instead of a 4.5-inch angle grinder, I moved up to a 7 to 9-inch angle grinder that's more powerful, but it is still an angle grinder. So it's not different, it's just bigger and more powerful. A belt sander. I don't use that many attachments. Actually, I don't use any attachments on my belt sander. Even my 2x72 that is drastically different than a 1x30. So as far as utility goes, the only difference is that it lasts longer and it has more power. So that's the difference that I've made. I also don't do a lot of custom work. I mostly stick to production work. A 2x72-inch belt sander certainly has more versatility when it comes to doing custom work because of the different wheel sizes and attachments that you can use. When it comes to a drill, you don't really need to upgrade a drill that much. You can go from a drill to a drill press. Most drill presses are going to do whatever job you need. You don't really need any crazy different variation unless you get into milling, in which case you would need a mill. You can get attachments for a drill press, but that's pretty rare that people get into that realm. So I'm just going to leave that to the people's choices who actually choose to do that step. As far as forges go, the upgrades usually are pretty simple and usually pretty minimal. Usually you go up to a bigger forge box with more burners or something like that. That really only depends on what you're making. If you're making knives that are really have a blade under 10 to 12 inches, you don't really need a 2-burner forge. If you're making swords and stuff that's longer, then it's definitely handy. But you don't really need to upgrade your forge if you're not making bigger tools. The only exception to this may be if you want something more efficient. You may change to a ribbon burner or something like that if you choose to do that. But as far as utility goes, there's really not a huge difference with forges as you upgrade. There's some, but it's not a necessary thing typically. Usually a forge that is well insulated and that has some sort of doors, if you have doors, is going to do a very usable, serviceable job. And that can really be the last thing that you would really upgrade. As far as an anvil goes, this really depends on what you start with and what you're using it for later on. If you move to a bigger anvil or one that has different attachments on it, some of them have different steps, different shaped horns and heels and things like that. That's all up to you and what you find to be necessary. Personally, a London style is just fine for me. And then a lot of ways that people upgrade anvils typically is weight. They get a bigger or a heavier one. Again, that one's up to you, because usually when you're making smaller knives, you don't need that much. You do need something that's going to resist that hammer strike so it compresses that material. But it doesn't take a lot to make a knife because you're not moving that much material. A knife is a fairly small object. Even a longer one, you're not moving any tremendous amount of material at a time. So if I were to lose my anvil right now I use about 100 to 120 pound Peterite anvil. If I had to totally restart, I would probably just get a Doyle anvil. And I don't know that I would really upgrade because knives just don't require that much resistance because they're not very big. And as far as bench grinders go, the biggest upgrade that I have made to that is just getting a bigger one. I mean, it's very simple. Bigger attachments have a faster turning speed. They don't have a faster turning speed, but the surface velocity of the wheel is faster. They have more horsepower, and because the wheels are bigger, it takes longer for them to wear down. And if you put the smaller attachments on the bigger grinder, it doesn't do any damage. It doesn't cause any problems. Sometimes they do turn a little bit slower, but as far as the torque they have, they don't really slow down near as easily. And as far as other tools to add to the shop, some people do choose to add things like a bandsaw, or maybe a mill or a lathe or something like that. And that really gets into what are you making? What do you want to make? I will tell you the truth about a bandsaw. For me, again, this is for me. I have a bandsaw and I almost never use it. I've used it very few times for the number of knives that I've made because I just don't really use it in my process. A lot of people, they rely on a bandsaw. It's a staple of their shop. So that just depends on what you want to do and how you want to run it. All of this is within your decisions, and you're going to be using whatever you buy or don't. So this video is already getting fairly long, so I'm going to go ahead and end it here with the checklist. But there is something else that you may want to look into. I have a checklist. It is a beginner's guide to help you work with a budget to actually pick these tools out and pick out which ones are going to be best for you in your shop. So look in the description on this video and you'll be able to download the guide, and it's a very complete guide. It has a lot of information about each individual tool to help you work within a budget and pick out one that's going to be the best for you. So hopefully this video was helpful for you. If it was, you should definitely leave a comment and a like, and you should definitely consider subscribing as well if you want to actually increase your skills and learn more about the knife making process. So until next time, stay safe, have fun, and I'll see you in the next one.